I thought my wedding day was the happiest day of my life. But that same night, I heard my husband whisper another woman's name, and the voice I recognized belonged to my best friend. That moment destroyed everything. My life once felt unreal, like something borrowed from another woman's dream. The kind of happiness you're scared to celebrate too loudly, afraid it might shatter if you do. I was engaged to Julian, the man I believed was my destiny. The man I imagined growing old with, raising children beside, building a life that felt safe and certain. Our wedding had been planned down to the smallest detail. Every choice mattered. The flowers matched the season. The music held meaning only we understood. Even the seating arrangement reflected years of shared memories. When I looked in the mirror that morning, dressed in white, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from excitement. My mother stood behind me, wiping tears from her eyes, whispering how proud she was. In that moment, I truly believed I had won at life. What I didn't know was that the day meant to seal my happiness would quietly open the door to the darkest chapter of my existence. There was never any doubt about who would stand beside me as my maid of honor. Laura Jenkins had been part of my life for as long as I could remember. She wasn't just a best friend, she was family. She knew my secrets, my fears, the versions of myself I never showed anyone else. Choosing her was automatic. Everyone expected it. That morning, she moved around my room with gentle efficiency, fixing my veil, adjusting my dress, smiling with what looked like pure affection. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have a man who loved me and a friend who never left my side. Looking back now, that smile feels like a carefully worn mask. We had chosen a secluded estate in the Virginia hills for the wedding, far from the city, surrounded by old trees and quiet beauty. The place felt timeless. Stone walls, tall windows, gardens that seemed to breathe calm. We wanted intimacy, not spectacle. A weekend where family and close friends could celebrate together without distractions. The night before the ceremony, everyone gathered on the patio. Soft lights hung above us, wine glasses clinked, laughter floated through the warm air. Julian seemed relaxed, affectionate even, his hand resting lightly at my back. Laura stayed close, just as she always had. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing looked suspicious. If someone had warned me that night, I would have laughed. I went to bed late, my mind replaying the day ahead, walking down the aisle, seeing Julian's face, starting a new life. Sleep came slowly, but it was peaceful. Morning arrived wrapped in sunlight. I woke with a lightness I hadn't felt since childhood. Laura entered my room first, carrying breakfast, smiling brightly. I thanked her, hugged her, trusted her, without a single doubt. The ceremony unfolded like a scene from a fairy tale. My father took my arm as the music began, white petals lined the aisle, faces turned toward me, eyes shining. Julian waited at the end, looking emotional, almost overwhelmed. I walked toward him, convinced this was the safest step I would ever take. When the officiant asked if I accepted him, I answered without hesitation. My voice shook, but my heart felt sure. Julian said his vows too, though for a brief second, something flickered across his face, something distant. I told myself it was nerves. The applause, the kiss, the celebration, all of it felt real. Dinner under the stars, toasts filled with warmth. My father spoke about love and commitment. Julian smiled, laughed, played his role perfectly. And yet, something felt slightly off. He looked at me, but not fully, as if part of him was somewhere else. I ignored the feeling. I didn't want doubt on my wedding day. That night, we entered the bridal suite together, candles lit, flowers everywhere, the room prepared for our first night as husband and wife. My heart raced with anticipation. Julian removed his watch, kicked off his shoes, and sighed deeply. "I'm exhausted," he said flatly, turning away. I stood there frozen, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. He didn't kiss me, didn't explain. He simply walked to the small bed in the corner of the room, lay down, and turned off the light. And in the darkness, on the night I had waited for my entire life, I felt something inside me quietly begin to break. I lay awake in silence, staring at the ceiling, unaware that before the night ended, I would hear something that would destroy everything I believed to be true. Sleep never really came that night. I lay still, staring into the darkness, listening to the soft hum of the old house settling around us. The room smelled like fresh flowers and candle wax, but none of it felt comforting anymore. Every few seconds, I glanced toward the corner where Julian lay. His back was turned to me, his breathing steady, distant, like we were strangers sharing a hotel room, not newlyweds. I tried to convince myself this was normal, that weddings were exhausting, that tomorrow morning we would laugh about it. But the silence felt heavy, intentional, like a door that had been shut with care. Eventually, exhaustion won. My eyes closed despite the tightness in my chest. I don't know how much time passed before a sound pulled me awake. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, a low, muffled noise, barely audible. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding, trying to place it. The room was dark, too quiet. I turned my head toward Julian's bed. It was empty. The sheets were cold and untouched, as if he hadn't been there long. A strange chill crawled at my spine. I stood, my bare feet touching the cold wooden floor, and listened again. There it was, a faint sound drifting down the hallway. Not loud enough to identify clearly, just enough to make my stomach twist. I opened the door slowly, careful not to let it creak. The hallway lights were off, but a thin strip of warm light glowed from a room at the far end. The same sound came again, short, restrained, unmistakably human. I told myself it could be anything. A television left on, someone talking in their sleep, laughter from outside. But my body didn't believe the lie. As I stepped into the hallway, a memory surfaced. Julian's mother mentioning earlier that she wasn't feeling well and had gone into town for medicine. Her room was supposed to be empty. She hadn't returned. No one had mentioned her since. The light was coming from her door. My heart began to race harder with every step. The sound grew clearer now, no longer vague. It wasn't a voice raised in conversation. It wasn't laughter. It was a sound meant to be hidden. I moved slowly, holding my breath, each step feeling heavier than the last. With every meter, fragments of moments flashed through my mind. Glances I'd ignored, small shifts in behavior, the way Julian hadn't looked at me that night, the way Laura had stayed close all evening. I reached the door. My hands were trembling so badly I had to press my palm against the wall to steady myself. The noise continued, soft, broken, intimate. My chest burned as if the air itself had turned against me. I leaned forward, pressing my ear gently against the wood. A creak, a stifled breath. Then I heard a woman's voice. Soft, familiar. I closed my eyes, willing myself to be wrong, but there was no mistaking it. That voice had laughed with me, cried with me, promised me loyalty since we were girls. It was Laura. The sound hit me like a physical blow. My knees nearly gave out as memories flooded my mind. Sleepovers, secrets, whispered dreams. Every moment of trust collapsed in an instant. Before I could move, before I could even process the betrayal, another voice joined hers. Low, breathless, unmistakable. Julian, my husband, the man who had turned away from me hours earlier, now spoke her name in a voice that left no room for doubt. The hallway seemed to tilt. I pressed my forehead against the wall, silent tears streaming down my face, my body shaking so violently I feared they might hear me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't confusion. It was betrayal, raw and undeniable. I didn't scream. I didn't knock. I didn't run. I stayed there, frozen, listening as the last pieces of my life shattered behind that door. I stood there until the sound finally stopped, and when the door opened, I made a decision that would change everything that came next. Time stopped meaning anything as I stood there in the hallway. Seconds stretched into something unbearable. My heart thudded so loudly I was certain they could hear it through the door. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run back to the room and pretend none of this was real. But my feet refused to move. I needed to see them. The door opened suddenly. Julian stepped out first. His shirt was half-buttoned, his belt crooked, his hair disheveled like someone who had rushed to compose himself. When his eyes met mine, all the color drained from his face. For a brief moment, he looked like a stranger caught in the wrong body, frozen, exposed, guilty. He didn't say a word. He just stared at me as if his mind were desperately searching for an excuse that didn't exist. Then she appeared behind him, Laura. Her makeup was smeared, her hair tangled, her heels dangling from one hand like she had forgotten what they were for. She stopped the moment she saw me. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. No apology, no denial, just silence. That silence said more than words ever could. I stood between them and the hallway, blocking their path. My body felt numb, but my voice, when it came, was steady in a way that surprised even me. "How long?" I asked. Neither of them answered. I laughed once, short and hollow, because the absurdity of it all threatened to crush me. "Was tonight not enough?" I continued. "Was my wedding day not enough for you?" Julian finally spoke, his voice rushed and sharp with panic. He said nothing had happened, that I was misunderstanding, that he had only gone to help Laura collect something his mother had left behind. The lie was almost insulting. Laura kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her silence louder than his words. Julian kept talking, piling one explanation on top of another, each more fragile than the last. He spoke like someone used to talking his way out of consequences. I stopped him. "I heard you," I said quietly. "Everything." That was when his shoulders dropped. The performance ended. His face twisted, not with remorse, but with defeat. He admitted it in a voice so low it barely carried, said he had been confused, that it had been going on for a while. He never said he was sorry. Laura finally began to cry then. She covered her face, repeating that she hadn't meant to hurt me, that it just happened. Her tears slid right past me. Whatever bond we once had dissolved completely in that hallway. I didn't argue, I didn't scream, I didn't beg for explanations. I turned away. Back in the bridal suite, I moved like a ghost. I gathered my belongings with mechanical precision, folding my dress, collecting my shoes, my phone, the pieces of a life that had ended hours after it began. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like a bride anymore. It looked like someone older, sharper, changed. No one followed me. I walked out of the estate barefoot, my dress brushing against the grass, the early morning air cold against my skin. Fog rolled low over the garden, swallowing the lights, the laughter, the lie of celebration. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. I walked until my legs ached and my throat burned from holding back tears. I sat on a bench beside an empty road as the sky slowly lightened, replaying every moment, every sign I had ignored. The realization hurt more than the betrayal that somewhere deep down I had felt it coming. When dawn fully arrived, exhaustion pushed me back toward the estate. Inside, everything looked untouched. Coffee cups on tables, soft voices, smiles. The world had moved on as if nothing had happened. I stood in the doorway, watching people laugh, and felt something harden inside me. They deserved the truth. I asked everyone to gather in the main living room. When they sat down and looked at me, confused, concerned, I spoke without trembling. I told them exactly what happened. As the room fell into stunned silence, I realized this wasn't just an ending. It was the moment I took my life back.
The room went silent in a way that felt unnatural, like even the walls were listening. No one spoke, no one moved. Faces that had been relaxed moments earlier now looked stunned, confused, unsure of where to rest their eyes. I stood in front of them, still wearing the remains of my wedding dress, dirt smudged along the hem, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stood halfway from his chair as if instinct alone had tried to shield me. Julian's parents didn't look at me at all. They stared at the floor, their shame heavy and unmistakable. I didn't dramatize anything. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told the truth. Plain, clear, impossible to twist. I told them where I had found Julian. I told them whose voice I had heard. I told them it had happened on my wedding night under the same roof where they had all celebrated love hours earlier. No one accused me of lying. No one asked for proof. They didn't need it. When I finished, I said one more thing, that I was ending the marriage, that there would be no discussions, no counseling, no explanations. I wasn't asking for sympathy, only respect for my decision. My father came to me then. He didn't say a word. He wrapped his arms around me with a strength that made my knees finally give in. In that moment, I let myself feel the pain, but only for a second. I wouldn't let it own me. I left the room quietly. I didn't look for Julian. I didn't need to. His absence spoke louder than any apology ever could. Within hours, I was home. The dress was folded and placed in a box I couldn't yet bring myself to open again. The silence of my apartment felt strange, but it was honest. No lies, no performances. That same day, I called a lawyer. There was no hesitation in my voice when I asked for an annulment. I didn't want time to soften my resolve. I didn't want people convincing me to forgive something unforgivable. The papers were filed swiftly. I refused to see Julian. He didn't deserve another conversation. Weeks passed. I learned through people, not from them, that Julian and Laura had moved in together almost immediately, as if the destruction they caused was just collateral damage to their love. They appeared together in public, unapologetic, acting like nothing shameful had happened. For a moment, it hurt. Then something unexpected happened. The anger faded. I threw myself into my work. Long hours, new ideas, risky decisions. I poured everything I had into building something that belonged to me alone. Slowly, painfully, I started to feel solid again. And karma, quiet, patient, precise, did the rest. Their relationship didn't age well. Arguments spilled through thin apartment walls. Trust dissolved into suspicion. What had begun in secrecy rotted quickly under daylight. Julian cheated again because that's what men like him do. Laura was left alone, abandoned the same way she had helped abandon me. No one rushed to comfort her. No one answered her calls. She learned, too late, what betrayal costs. Years passed. I grew stronger, calmer, more myself. My business expanded. I stopped living in survival mode and started living with intention. And then, when I wasn't searching for it, peace turned into something more. I met Daniel at a professional event. He didn't overwhelm me with charm or promises. He listened. He respected silence. Being around him felt easy, safe in a way I hadn't known before. Love didn't crash into my life this time. It arrived quietly. I thought the story ended with betrayal, but what came next proved that losing everything was the beginning of gaining myself.
Daniel didn't enter my life with fireworks or dramatic declarations. There was no rush, no pressure, no sense that I needed to be anything other than what I already was. We met during a business presentation, two professionals exchanging polite conversation that slowly turned into something warmer. What stood out wasn't what he said, but how he listened. He paid attention in a way that felt rare, almost unfamiliar. At first, I kept my distance, not because I didn't like him, but because peace felt suspicious. After everything I'd survived, my instincts were trained to look for cracks, hidden motives, warning signs. I waited for him to demand more than I could give, to push where I wasn't ready. He never did. Our conversations unfolded naturally, over coffee, during long walks, through late-night messages that didn't ask for explanations.
He never tried to rescue me or fix my past. He didn't treat me like someone broken. That alone felt revolutionary. Slowly, I noticed a shift within myself. I started waking up without that familiar weight in my chest. I laughed more easily. I trusted my own joy again, without waiting for it to be taken away. People around me noticed too. They said I looked lighter, calmer, more grounded. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. With Daniel, love didn't feel like urgency. It felt like steadiness. He showed up when he said he would. He respected my boundaries without questioning them. He never asked me to shrink, to compromise my growth, or to compete for his attention. For the first time, I understood what healthy love actually looked like. Around that same time, my business flourished in ways I hadn't expected. I opened a second location, then a third. Opportunities came not because I chased them desperately, but because I was clear about what I wanted. Confidence replaced fear. Independence replaced need. One afternoon, I received a message I hadn't expected. It was from Julian. The tone was polite, almost nostalgic. He said he was glad I was doing well, that he sometimes thought about what we could have been, that he wished me happiness. I didn't reply. Silence was the only response he deserved. Weeks later, he showed up unannounced at my store. I barely recognized him. He looked thinner, worn down, like life had taken more than it gave back. He asked for a few minutes to talk. Closure, he called it. I agreed, briefly. He spoke about regret, about mistakes, about losing me because he hadn't known my worth. He looked at me as if expecting something. Anger, sadness, longing? I felt none of it. When he finished, I told him the truth, that he no longer had any place in my life, that what he destroyed couldn't be rebuilt, that I didn't hate him, I simply didn't carry him with me anymore. That realization hit him harder than any insult could have. I asked him to leave. He hesitated, then walked away, shoulders slumped, finally understanding that the door was closed for good. When Daniel arrived later that day, he sensed something had happened. He didn't ask questions, he just held me. In that quiet moment, I understood something profound. Love doesn't hurt. Love doesn't confuse. Love doesn't ask you to betray yourself. I thought the chapter was finally over, but healing had one last lesson to teach me about who I had become. After Julian walked out of my store that day, something settled inside me. Not relief, not victory, just clarity. The kind that arrives quietly when you finally understand that the past no longer has permission to speak. I didn't replay the conversation. I didn't analyze his words. For the first time, I didn't carry him home with me in my thoughts. That's when I knew I was truly free. Life didn't suddenly turn into a fairy tale after that. Healing isn't dramatic, it's repetitive. It's choosing yourself again and again, even on days when old memories try to sneak back in. But those memories no longer controlled me. They were lessons, not wounds. Daniel became part of my life in a way that felt natural, unforced. He didn't rush milestones or demand reassurance. He never made me feel like love was something I had to earn. Being with him felt like standing on solid ground after years of instability. What surprised me most was how safe silence felt with him. We could sit together without talking, each lost in our own thoughts, and it never felt empty. There was no tension, no need to fill the space. That kind of peace was something I had never experienced before. With Julian, silence had always meant distance. With Daniel, it meant trust. As my relationship grew stronger, so did my sense of self. I stopped defining my life by what had happened to me. I stopped telling my story like it was something that broke me. Instead, I began to see it as something that shaped me. I no longer avoided mirrors. I looked at my reflection differently now. I saw strength where I once saw vulnerability. I saw discernment instead of fear. I understood that the woman who had been betrayed on her wedding night wasn't weak. She had been brave enough to walk away instead of begging for half love. People often talk about forgiveness as if it's the final step of healing. But I learned something different. Healing doesn't always require forgiveness. Sometimes it simply requires release, letting go of the need for answers, letting go of the need to be understood by people who never intended to understand you. Laura never reached out again. I heard through distant circles that her life had unraveled slowly. Jobs lost, friendships dissolved. The trust she destroyed was never rebuilt, not because people were cruel, but because betrayal leaves a permanent mark. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I didn't need to. Life had already delivered its verdict. One evening, Daniel and I sat on my terrace watching the sun sink into the horizon. No grand conversation, no declarations, just the sound of the city settling into night. He reached for my hand, and I realized something quietly profound. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of love, not of commitments, not of loss. I had learned that even if everything fell apart again, I would survive. That knowledge gave me a confidence I had never known before. Love felt like a choice now, not a risk. Months turned into years. My business continued to expand, but success no longer defined me. It supported my life, it didn't consume it. I protected my peace fiercely. I learned to say no without guilt and yes without fear. And one day, while organizing old boxes, I came across the one containing my wedding dress. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I opened it. As I unfolded the fabric from that night, I realized there was one final truth I had never allowed myself to face. The box had been tucked away on the highest shelf, untouched for years. I hadn't forgotten about it. I had simply chosen not to open it. Some things feel too heavy to revisit until you know you're strong enough to carry them without breaking. That afternoon, I was. I sat on the floor and lifted the lid slowly. Inside was the wedding dress, folded carefully, still faintly scented with time and dust. Alongside it were dried flowers, a pair of shoes I had walked miles in, and photographs from a day that once meant everything to me. I expected pain. Instead, what I felt was distance. The dress no longer symbolized loss or humiliation. It was evidence. Proof that I had loved deeply, trusted fully, and survived something that could have shattered me. I ran my fingers along the fabric, noticing how small it seemed now, as if it belonged to another version of me entirely. And maybe it did. I realized then that I had spent years framing that night as the moment my life fell apart, but that wasn't true. It was the moment my illusions collapsed. The real damage would have been staying, accepting betrayal in exchange for comfort, silence in exchange for security. Walking away had been the bravest thing I had ever done. I packed the dress away again, but this time with intention, not to hide it, but to honor it. Every scar in my life had taught me discernment. Every loss had sharpened my sense of self. Daniel came home later that evening and found me sitting quietly with a cup of tea. He didn't ask what I'd been doing. He didn't need to. He looked at me with that familiar calm, the kind that never demanded explanation. "You look lighter," he said. I smiled because he was right. Over time, people began asking me how I could trust again after what I'd been through. The answer surprised even me. I didn't trust because the world was suddenly safer. I trusted because I had learned to protect myself. Trusting again wasn't about blind faith, it was about standards, about knowing that love should feel steady, not chaotic, that respect isn't something you negotiate for, that loyalty isn't rare, it's required. Daniel never asked me to compete with ghosts. He didn't resent my past or feel threatened by it. He understood that loving someone meant accepting where they had been without trying to erase it. That acceptance healed parts of me I didn't know were still sore. Years earlier, I had confused intensity for passion and sacrifice for devotion. I had believed that love meant enduring discomfort. Now I knew better. Love should never cost you your dignity. Occasionally, I still heard Julian's name in passing. He moved from place to place, relationship to relationship, always searching, never staying. His life seemed restless, unfinished. But I no longer felt anything when I heard about him. No anger, no satisfaction, just indifference. And indifference, I learned, is freedom. One night, while walking through my neighborhood alone, I passed a storefront window and caught my reflection. I stopped, not out of vanity, but curiosity. The woman staring back at me wasn't the bride from years ago. She looked calmer, stronger, rooted. I saw someone who knew her worth without needing it confirmed. And in that moment, I understood something simple and powerful. My story was never about betrayal. It was about transformation. Just when I thought the past had nothing left to teach me, a final encounter reminded me how far I had truly come.
I hadn't planned on seeing Julian again. Life has a way of doing that, placing old chapters in your path when you least expect them, not to reopen wounds, but to show you how much they've healed. I ran into him one afternoon while leaving a conference across town. The encounter was accidental, brief, and unavoidable. He was standing near the exit scrolling through his phone when he looked up and froze. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Time hadn't been kind to him, not in appearance exactly, but in presence. He looked unsettled, like someone constantly waiting for the ground to shift beneath him. When he smiled, it was hesitant, uncertain, nothing like the confidence he once wore so easily. He asked how I was doing. I answered honestly. I said I was well. That seemed to catch him off guard. He commented on my work, my business, my life, as if he had been following it from a distance. Then came the familiar tone, nostalgia disguised as reflection. He said losing me had changed him, that he had made mistakes, that he hoped I had found happiness. There was a pause, a space where years ago I might have filled the silence with reassurance or guilt. This time I didn't. I wished him well and prepared to leave. That was when he asked the question, "Do you ever think about what we had?" I looked at him carefully before answering, not with resentment, not with softness either, just truth. I think about what I learned, not what I lost. Something in my words landed harder than I expected. His expression tightened, like someone realizing a door had closed long ago without him noticing. We said goodbye politely, no drama, no unfinished business. And as I walked away, I felt something remarkable. Nothing. No racing heart, no anger, no ache. Just peace. Later that evening, Daniel and I cooked dinner together. Music played softly in the background as we moved around the kitchen, sharing space effortlessly. I told him about the encounter, not because it haunted me, but because I didn't believe in secrets anymore. He listened, nodded, and smiled gently. "I'm glad you're here," he said. That simple sentence meant everything, because I was here, present, grounded, unburdened. As the night settled in, I reflected on how far I had come. I used to think healing was about closure, final conversations, apologies, explanations. But real closure doesn't come from other people. It comes from recognizing that you no longer need anything from them. The past loses its power the moment you stop asking it to make sense. Julian no longer represented loss. He represented a lesson learned early enough to save me years of compromise. Laura, too, faded into that category, someone who showed me the cost of misplaced trust and the value of discernment. I didn't wish harm on either of them. I simply wished distance, and distance, I had learned, is sometimes the kindest boundary you can set. That night, as I lay beside Daniel, listening to his steady breathing, I realized how different love feels when it's built on respect rather than fear. I wasn't waiting for disappointment. I wasn't bracing for impact. I was resting. I thought that moment was the final page, but there was still one truth left to share, the one that changed how I saw love forever. For a long time, I believed love was supposed to feel overwhelming, intense, consuming. I thought if it didn't hurt a little, it wasn't real. That belief shaped so many of my early choices. Who I trusted, what I tolerated, how much of myself I gave away without question. Losing Julian forced me to confront that belief head on. I began to understand that what I had once called love was often just fear dressed up as devotion. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of admitting that something wasn't right. With Daniel, everything felt different.
Not because he was perfect, but because I didn't feel the need to abandon myself to keep him. I didn't lose sleep wondering where I stood. I didn't shrink my needs to avoid conflict. Love didn't require me to be smaller. It allowed me to be more. I started paying attention to the quiet signs of a healthy relationship, the consistency, the honesty, the way disagreements didn't feel like threats. When problems came up, we talked about them without turning them into battles. Respect wasn't something we had to rebuild over and over again. It was simply there. That's when I realized how distorted my earlier idea of love had been. I used to admire endurance. Now I admire discernment. I used to believe loyalty meant staying no matter what. Now I knew it meant walking away when respect disappeared. Friends sometimes ask if I ever missed the life I almost had. The wedding, the house, the version of the future I once imagined. The honest answer surprised even me. I didn't miss it because it wasn't real. It was a dream built on assumptions, not truth. A picture-perfect future that required silence, compromise, and denial to survive. Letting go of it didn't leave a hole in my life. It made room. Room for peace, room for growth, room for authenticity. As my life continued to settle into something steady and fulfilling, I noticed another shift within myself. I no longer felt the urge to explain my choices. I didn't justify my boundaries or apologize for my standards. The right people understood. The wrong ones drifted away naturally. And that was okay. One evening, while organizing paperwork in my office, I came across an old photo from the wedding weekend. I studied it carefully, not with sadness, but curiosity. The woman in that picture looked hopeful, trusting, certain. I felt compassion for her. She had loved bravely, she had believed deeply, and when everything collapsed, she had chosen dignity over comfort. That mattered. I placed the photo back in the drawer, no longer needing to hide it or hold on to it. It was part of my story, but no longer the center. Later that night, Daniel and I sat together in comfortable silence. He was reading, I was writing. There was no need to fill the space between us. That quiet companionship felt more intimate than any dramatic declaration I had ever experienced. I understood then that love isn't proven in moments of passion, it's revealed in moments of calm. And just when I thought my journey was complete, a simple question made me realize why this story needed to be told. The question came unexpectedly during a small gathering with friends. We were sitting around a table, the kind of evening filled with laughter and easy conversation, when someone asked how Daniel and I met. It was an innocent question, asked without curiosity for drama. I answered simply, but then someone else leaned in and asked, "How did you know you could trust again?" The room quieted just enough for the question to linger. I realized then that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a reflection of something many people carry quietly. Betrayal, disappointment, the fear of repeating the same pain. I had spent years moving forward without looking back, but maybe the journey mattered as much as the destination. So I spoke. I didn't share details for shock. I shared them for clarity. I talked about the wedding night that changed everything, the silence that followed, and the choice I made to leave instead of pleading for explanations. I spoke about the months of rebuilding, the mistakes, the moments of doubt, and the strength that came from standing alone. No one interrupted me. When I finished, I saw something familiar in their faces. Recognition. Some nodded, others looked away, lost in their own memories. Pain, I learned, doesn't need elaborate description to be understood. It only needs honesty. That night, someone pulled me aside and said, "I wish I had left sooner." Those words stayed with me. They reminded me that staying silent about survival doesn't protect others. It isolates them. Stories don't exist to glorify pain, but to remind people they're not alone in it. That's when I understood why my experience mattered, not because of the betrayal, but because of the decision that followed. Walking away had been terrifying. Staying would have been easier in the short term. But easy choices often come with long-term consequences. Choosing dignity over familiarity changed the trajectory of my life. I stopped viewing my past as something shameful. It wasn't a failure. It was a turning point. In the days that followed, I reflected deeply on what healing actually means. It doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending nothing hurt. Healing means integrating the experience without letting it define you. I didn't become cold or guarded after what happened. I became discerning. I learned to listen to people, to patterns, and to myself. Daniel often said that the strongest thing about me wasn't what I endured, but what I refused to accept afterward. He was right. Love doesn't ask you to betray yourself. That truth became my compass. I no longer chased validation. I no longer explained my boundaries. I surrounded myself with people who respected my time, my work, and my peace. Anything less no longer felt negotiable. And the most surprising part? Joy returned quietly. Not in bursts of excitement, but in consistency. In mornings without anxiety, in evenings without doubt, in relationships that didn't require performance. I had once believed happiness was something you earned by enduring pain. I was wrong, and as I looked back at everything I had survived, I realized the ending of my story wasn't about love at all. It was about choosing myself. For a long time, I thought choosing myself meant being alone, that it was a decision made out of bitterness or fear. I couldn't have been more wrong. Choosing myself didn't isolate me, it clarified everything. It taught me who belonged in my life and who never truly did. After telling my story, something unexpected happened. People began opening up to me. Quiet conversations turned into confessions. Friends admitted they were staying in relationships that drained them. Colleagues shared stories of betrayal they had never spoken aloud. I realized how many people were surviving instead of living, afraid to disrupt what looked stable from the outside. I never told anyone what to do. I simply told them what I did. That was enough. Choosing myself didn't mean I stopped caring. It meant I stopped sacrificing my well-being to preserve illusions. I learned that love without respect isn't love. It's endurance. And endurance is not a virtue when it costs you your sense of self. Daniel never felt threatened by this version of me. He didn't need me to be softer, quieter, or more accommodating. He admired my clarity. We built our relationship around shared values instead of shared wounds. That made all the difference. We talked openly about expectations, boundaries, and the future, not as demands, but as mutual understanding. There was no guessing game, no emotional instability disguised as passion. What we had was simple, and because of that, it was strong. I stopped romanticizing chaos. Peace became my standard. One afternoon, while walking through my neighborhood, I noticed how differently I moved through the world. My shoulders weren't tense. My mind wasn't racing. I wasn't bracing for disappointment. I had learned that even if something ended tomorrow, I would be okay. That certainty was freedom. I didn't need to prove anything to Julian, Laura, or anyone else who had doubted my strength. Their opinions no longer lived rent-free in my mind. I had nothing left to defend. The woman I had become didn't need validation, only alignment. At home, Daniel and I shared quiet rituals that grounded us. Morning coffee, evening walks, shared laughter over small things. None of it was dramatic. All of it was real. And that reality felt richer than any fantasy I had once chased. I sometimes thought about the girl I used to be, the one who believed love required suffering, compromise without balance, silence to keep the peace. I wished I could sit beside her and tell him this: you don't have to earn love by hurting. You don't have to stay where you are disrespected. You are allowed to leave. That message became something I carried with me, not as regret, but as purpose. Because choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival with integrity. And as my life settled into this quiet strength, I realized there was only one final truth left to say, the one that truly completes this story. My story doesn't end with revenge, confrontation, or a dramatic reunion. It ends with something much quieter and far more powerful: peace. Today, I wake up in a life that feels steady, honest, and fully mine. I don't rush through my mornings or brace myself for disappointment. I move through my days with intention, not fear. The chaos that once defined my emotional world no longer has a voice in my head. Daniel is still beside me, not as a savior, not as a reward for suffering, but as a partner who chose me when I was already whole. We didn't build our relationship on broken promises or shared trauma. We built it on respect, trust, and the understanding that love should never require self-erasure. Sometimes we sit together in silence as the sun sets, a book in his hands, a cup of tea in mine. And in those moments, I realize how misunderstood happiness truly is. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand proof, it simply exists. People often expect stories like mine to end with bitterness. They ask if I've forgiven Julian or Laura. The truth is simpler than that. I don't carry them with me anymore. Not in anger, not in resentment, not even in forgiveness. They are chapters I no longer reread. I didn't heal by rewriting the past. I healed by releasing my need to explain it. The woman I am now doesn't seek validation, approval, or permission. She trusts her instincts. She honors her boundaries. She understands that love is not something to chase. It's something to recognize when it feels right. And most importantly, she knows her worth without needing someone else to confirm it. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: betrayal doesn't destroy you unless you let it redefine you. Pain can either harden you or sharpen you. I chose the latter. Losing everything I thought I wanted forced me to build something better, something real. This isn't a story about a wedding gone wrong. It's a story about walking away with dignity. It's about learning that the strongest love you'll ever have is the one you give yourself when you refuse to stay where you're not respected. If you're listening to this and standing at the edge of a difficult decision, if you feel small, uncertain, or afraid to start over, know this: leaving doesn't mean failing. Sometimes leaving is the moment you finally succeed. You don't need to be rescued. You need to choose yourself. And when you do, life has a way of meeting you there, calmer, clearer, and more honest than anything you could have imagined. My happy ending didn't come from another person. It came from me. If this story resonated with you, stay, because sometimes the stories that heal us most are the ones that remind us we're stronger than we think. If today's story touched your heart or kept you hooked, you can show your love by sending a super thanks. Your support helps me continue creating more powerful life stories for you. Thank you truly for always being so kind and supportive. I can't wait to read your thoughts about this story. On your screen right now, you'll find 2 new stories that I highly recommend, filled with emotions, twists, and lessons. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for many more inspiring life stories. Until the next one, sending you love, respect, and gratitude. See you in the next story.